They say money can't buy happiness, but what they never tell you is that it can buy a script for your entire life. One you didn't write, one you're forced to follow. Nathaniel Carmichael stood at the edge of a marble balcony overlooking Beverly Hills, the cool wind brushing against his tailored suit like a whisper of everything he was never allowed to say. From this height, the world looked perfect, sterile and gold-tinted, as though dipped in wealth's delusion. The city lights blinked like polite applause for his existence. But inside he was cracking. He hadn't chosen this life. He hadn't chosen the perfectly pressed expectations or the $12,000 watch ticking every second of it away. He hadn't chosen to become the son of Evelyn Carmichael. And no one ever really said no to Evelyn Carmichael. She was the kind of woman who didn't walk into a room. She occupied it. A living sculpture of silk and calculation, Evelyn was both feared and admired in equal measure. Her words were velvet daggers. Her love was performance. And for her only son, love meant obedience. So when she said, "You're meeting the governor's niece this weekend," it wasn't a suggestion. It was prophecy. Nathaniel lowered his coffee cup and stared at her across the kitchen island of their modernist mansion. The air was laced with citrus and tension. "I have plans," he said, keeping his voice even. Evelyn didn't even blink. Plans can change. Legacy doesn't. He knew better than to fight. You don't win against someone who trained you to lose beautifully. That's why he never told her about Isla. He met Isla in East LA in a tucked-away cafe that looked like it belonged in another decade. No valet, no polished brass, just warmth, color, and art bleeding off the walls. She wasn't impressed by his last name. She didn't care about board seats or gala invites. Isla cared about how light fell through buildings, about murals that told untold stories, about designing spaces that made people feel seen. He hadn't meant to talk to her that day. He was just hiding from his life, from himself. But something about the way she smiled without trying, the way her hands moved like she was always making something out of nothing, drew him in. And he kept coming back. In that small cafe, Nathaniel was allowed to exist without a brand. No expectations, no history. Just a man learning how to breathe again. Isla was finishing her architecture degree while working 2 jobs. Her world was textured, flawed, real. When she laughed, it wasn't rehearsed. When she looked at him, it wasn't with calculation. With Isla, he wasn't a Carmichael. He was just Nathaniel. But paradise never lasts in the world of the powerful. Secrets in their world are either weapons or time bombs. He should have known Evelyn would find out. She always did. Her surveillance wasn't just physical. It was cultural, habitual. People owed her. People feared her. That's why one evening while he was driving Isla home, his phone rang. Her name lit up the screen like a warning. "I know about the girl," she said. No hello, no pretense. His grip tightened on the wheel. "Her name is Isla." There was a pause, and then in her most saccharine voice, "I've invited her to the Carmichael Foundation Gala next week. It's time I meet her." His heart sank. Evelyn didn't invite. She summoned. And when she summoned, it was never to bless. It was to expose. Still, some naive part of him wanted to believe this could be different. Maybe she was softening. Maybe she could see what he saw in Isla. But Evelyn wasn't soft. She was strategy in pearls. So why did he stay silent? Because even the strong don't always know how to run from their chains. And so, Isla received a gilded invitation and a designer dress delivered to her apartment. "We would be honored to have you," the card read. Her name was misspelled, but she smiled, holding it like a door to a world she never thought she'd touch. "You sure about this?" Jamie, her roommate, asked, eyeing the dress with suspicion. "It's too much. This smells like bait." Isla hesitated. "I want to believe she's giving me a chance." "She's giving you a stage," Jamie murmured. "Don't forget who's pulling the curtains." Isla had grown up learning how to survive moments like these. She just didn't know she was walking into a trap dressed as opportunity. And so the scene was set. The mansion polished, the wine chilled, and a storm was about to begin. one that would unravel dynasties, expose betrayals, and challenge the meaning of love, loyalty, and legacy. But before we dive deeper into this incredible, true inspired tale of power and redemption, take a moment to support our channel by hitting the subscribe button. Every new subscriber gives us the fuel to create more stories that move you, challenge you, and, just like this one, leave you thinking long after the final word. So if you're enjoying this so far, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for the next chapter. Now, let's see how closely you've been following this story. Here's a quick question to get your thoughts. Isla works in East LA and studies architecture, but how did she and Nathaniel first meet? Was it A, at a networking event organized by the Carmichael Foundation, E, at a small cafe where Nathaniel was trying to escape his world? Comment your answer, A or B, below. We love reading your thoughts, and your comment might just be featured in our next video. And now, let's continue with the story, where a dress, a smile, and a single night are about to change everything. The invitation came like a whisper from a world Isla Moreno didn't belong to. It was slipped under her apartment door in a heavyweight envelope, embossed with gold foil and sealed with a wax insignia she didn't recognize until she read the note inside. The Carmichael Foundation requests the honor of your presence at our annual Legacy Gala, hosted at the Getty Center. The words were typed in regal serif, but it was the handwritten signature at the bottom that made her heart skip. Evelyn Carmichael. For a moment, Isla sat still on the edge of her bed, blinking as though the paper might vanish. Her fingers grazed the elegant strokes of Evelyn's name. The first thought that crossed her mind was that this must be a mistake. But the invitation was clear. Her name was printed at the top, misspelled slightly as Isla, but unmistakably her. When she showed Jamie, her roommate, the envelope, Jamie's face pinched into concern. This doesn't feel right. Why not? Isla asked, already holding the card delicately, as though it might shatter. Because Evelyn Carmichael doesn't do warm welcomes, Jamie replied, folding her arms. She stages things, she moves pieces. You're being invited into a performance, not a party. Before Isla could argue, there was a knock at the door. A courier stood on the other side with a long garment bag and a small white box. Delivery for Miss Moreno, he said, placing them carefully on the table and offering a nod before leaving. Isla unzipped the bag to reveal a dress. Sleek, black, sculpted to accentuate and shield at once. The kind of dress that turned heads, though she wasn't sure in which direction. The shoes inside the box were minimalist stilettos, expensive without being flashy. There was a note pinned inside the neckline of the dress. For the gala. I hope it suits you. E. Jamie stared at the dress like it was made of poison. She sent you this to wear? Isla nodded. Maybe she's trying. Trying what? Jamie snapped. To test how much humiliation you'll endure? Or maybe she wants to make sure you stick out or disappear. Isla looked down at the gown, unsure. She wanted to believe that Evelyn had made an effort. Maybe it wasn't friendship or warmth, but an olive branch, brittle though it might be. Maybe it was a chance to prove she belonged, not in wealth or name, but in conviction. That night, after her shift at the cafe, Isla pressed the dress against her chest and stared at herself in the mirror. She tried to imagine how it would feel to walk into a space filled with people like Nathaniel, people with last names that meant something. Would she tremble? Would they see right through her? Or worse, would they not see her at all? By the day of the gala, her nerves had matured into a quiet, pulsing storm. She dressed slowly, her fingers careful on the zipper. The heels felt foreign beneath her feet, forcing her posture into a straight line. She pulled her hair back, let her curls soften around her shoulders. Her makeup was subtle but intentional. She looked at herself one final time before leaving, searching her own reflection for strength. The Getty Center loomed on the hill like a temple of light. Cars lined the circular drive, each one more luxurious than the last. As her Uber pulled away, Isla paused at the steps, clutching her invitation like a passport into foreign territory. Inside, chandeliers reflected off glass walls. Strings swelled from a quartet tucked in the far corner. Voices floated and glasses clinked, and every movement felt choreographed. Nathaniel met her at the entrance with a smile that almost undid her. "You look amazing," he whispered, pressing a kiss to her cheek. She felt her body relax slightly. With him, at least, she felt real. But it didn't take long for the tension to return. The first comment was innocuous enough. A woman, perhaps in her 60s, leaned toward Isla and said, "Darling, they've upgraded the staff's wardrobe. You all look absolutely impeccable." Isla blinked. "I'm not staff," she said gently. "Oh," the woman said, blinking back. "I see." But she didn't. Not really. The second comment came moments later from a man in a navy tux who held out an empty flute. "Sparkling water, please. And if you have a lemon—" "I'm not waitstaff," Isla said more firmly this time. His eyebrows raised. "Really? Apologies. The dress—" She turned away before he could finish. As she moved through the event, the whispers became more audible, more pointed. Some chuckled, some avoided her gaze altogether. Others assumed she was part of a performance or immersive exhibit. And then came the worst of it. 2 young women near the bar, laughing under their breath. "She's wearing the uniform. Evelyn is savage." Isla's blood ran cold. She suddenly saw the room through new eyes. The waitstaff moving swiftly with silver trays, clad in the exact same gown Evelyn had sent her. Identical fabric, cut, length. Her heart began to hammer. It wasn't a mistake. This was planned. She searched the crowd for Nathaniel, but couldn't find him. Everywhere she turned, eyes followed her, not with admiration, but with derision, curiosity, or worse, pity. Evelyn stood across the room, glass of champagne in hand, speaking with a state senator. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Evelyn smiled, cool, unreadable, and then turned back to her conversation. Isla fled. She stumbled her way out onto the side terrace, the cool night air like a slap. Her breath caught in her throat. She leaned over the balcony, her palms gripping the stone railing. Behind her, the celebration continued as though she'd never been part of it. She didn't belong here, not because of who she was, but because someone had decided she didn't deserve to. Nathaniel found her a few minutes later. "There you are. I've been looking everywhere," he said. "What happened? Why did you disappear?" Isla turned around slowly, her face pale and lips trembling. "You didn't notice?" "Notice what?" "The dress," she said, her voice cracking. "Your mother sent me this. It's the same as the staff uniform." Nathaniel's expression shifted from concern to horror. "What? Number that can't—" "I was humiliated," she whispered. "People handed me their glasses, asked me to clean up messes. I've never felt so invisible and exposed at the same time." Nathaniel took a step closer. "Isla, I swear I didn't know." She knew. She planned this. She wanted me to be reminded of where I come from, of where she thinks I belong. His hands hovered between them. "Please don't go." Isla looked at him, her eyes red. "If you can stand here and honestly tell me that this world won't swallow me whole, then maybe I'll stay. But if you're still hoping I can change into someone that fits into it, someone she approves of, then I'm already lost." Nathaniel shook his head. "I don't want you to change. I want her to." "She won't," Isla said. "She doesn't have to. That's the privilege." She stepped back. Her voice was calm now, resolute. "I can't be part of a life where I have to be tested to be accepted. I won't beg to belong." She walked away, her heels clicking softly against the marble. Nathaniel didn't stop her. He couldn't. Because in that moment he understood that she wasn't walking away from him. She was walking toward herself. And for the first time in years, Nathaniel wasn't sure he could follow. Nathaniel had always believed that love would be enough to keep the two halves of his world from colliding. He thought that if he held on to Isla tightly enough, her grace could soften the rigid lines of his mother's world. That if he smiled hard enough, wore the right suit, recited the right speeches, his mother would eventually open her heart. That Isla would be seen not just as the girl he loved, but as someone worthy in her own right. But by the time he stepped back into the ballroom, that illusion was already crumbling. Inside the Getty Center's grand atrium, champagne still flowed, laughter still echoed off the vaulted ceilings, and the city glittered in the background like a stage light. But Nathaniel saw none of it. His mind replayed Isla's words over and over. The same as the staff uniform? It explained everything. The glances, the whispers, the humiliation etched into her expression. He moved through the crowd searching for Evelyn. She stood near the center, surrounded by board members, her voice poised and her smile practiced. She saw him coming, and for the briefest second her expression faltered. "Mother," he said lowly, stopping inches from her, "you sent her that dress." Evelyn blinked slowly. "Darling, lower your voice. This is hardly the time." He didn't move. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You set her up." Evelyn gave a tight smile to the chairman of the Arts Commission and excused herself with the grace of a seasoned politician. When they were out of earshot, she turned to Nathaniel. "I advised her, that's all. She could have worn anything else. She made a choice. You humiliated her." "I reminded her of the truth," Evelyn replied coldly, "and of the distance between ambition and reality." Nathaniel's stomach turned. She deserved to walk into this room with dignity, with respect. "She deserved a test," Evelyn corrected. "One you clearly failed alongside her." He stared at her, stunned. "This isn't a test, Mother. This is your fear disguised as strategy. You saw something in her that threatened the image you built, and instead of meeting it with curiosity, you met it with cruelty." "She doesn't belong in this world," Evelyn said calmly. "You're a Carmichael, and Carmichaels don't let emotion dictate legacy." "She's not the one who's ashamed," Nathaniel snapped. "You are. You're terrified of a world where love isn't something you can buy or breed." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "Be careful, Nathaniel. Sentimentality has its place, but not here." He didn't respond. He turned and walked away, leaving his mother standing in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by applause and chandeliers that suddenly seemed more like spotlights, exposing everything she couldn't hide. Outside, Isla was already gone. She had left without a word, disappearing into the city that had raised her. Her heels now in hand, she had walked the steep incline leading down from the Getty, shivering slightly in the late-night breeze. The lights of Los Angeles blurred behind her, both dazzling and distant. Her hands trembled, not from cold, but from shame. The kind of shame that doesn't belong to you, but somehow settles on your skin like ash after a fire. At the base of the hill, she called a car. Her driver didn't ask questions, and she didn't offer any. She sat in silence, her eyes fixed on the city beyond the window. She replayed the evening not as a series of events, but as a slow unraveling. How quickly elegance turned into exile. How silence, even from someone you love, can feel like betrayal. Back at home, Jamie was waiting. Isla didn't speak as she entered the apartment. She dropped her shoes by the door, peeled off the dress like it was covered in thorns, and left it crumpled on the floor. She walked straight to the bathroom, turned on the faucet, and let the water run until the steam blurred the mirror. When she finally emerged, she sat on the edge of the bed with a towel wrapped around her. Jamie brought her a cup of tea and sat beside her. "Say it," Isla whispered. "Say what?" "That I never should have gone." Jamie looked at her gently. "You went because you believed in something better. That's never the wrong choice. It's just, not everyone's ready to meet you there." For days, Isla said little. She went to work. She sat through class. She ignored the text messages from Nathaniel, each one more desperate than the last. She couldn't read them. Not yet. Meanwhile, Nathaniel was unraveling. He couldn't concentrate at work. He showed up late to meetings, snapped at assistants, and canceled appointments. The polished man his mother had molded began to show cracks, and the board took notice. His father had died when he was young, and since then, Evelyn had built an empire with ruthless precision. But Nathaniel began to see that the foundation of their empire was not legacy. It was fear covered in silk, fear of change, fear of authenticity, fear of being questioned. And now, the one person who had made him feel real again was gone. One night, unable to bear it, he drove across the city to the cafe where they first met. It was closed. He sat on the curb outside, staring at the mural across the street, the one Isla had told him she loved because it looked like someone tried to color in a broken heart. It was then he realized how deeply fractured his world had become. The next day, he drove to her apartment and waited outside for hours. She didn't appear, so he left a letter in the mailbox, then another the following day. Flowers. A book of architectural essays she once mentioned. Silence. Isla, meanwhile, had begun to channel her pain into something tangible. She poured herself into her student project, a redesign of a dilapidated downtown community center into a space of light, art, and accessibility. Her sketches were furious and full of soul. She stayed up late crafting models and rereading the few encouraging notes she'd once received from a reclusive design mentor she'd never met in person. Mr. Avery, an anonymous philanthropist who funded urban revitalization programs and had taken an interest in her early work. It was during a review session that she caught the attention of a woman from the Urban Planning Council. The woman asked for more of Isla's work, impressed by the emotion behind her design. Within weeks, Isla was invited to speak at a design showcase. One opportunity led to another, and slowly, Isla began to see that her worth wasn't dependent on who accepted her, but on what she was willing to create, even when no one was watching. Still, Nathaniel lingered in her thoughts. Not because she missed the world he came from, but because she missed the way he made her feel when he wasn't trying to be someone else. She missed the man who listened like the world stopped when she spoke, the one who asked about her designs like they were blueprints to something sacred. It would be weeks before they spoke again. When they did, it wouldn't be at a party. It wouldn't be in a suit or a gown. It would be on a quiet afternoon in a place neither of them expected. And when it came, the conversation would be honest, raw, and unlike anything the Carmichaels had ever rehearsed. But for now, the silence was the only truth they both understood. It wasn't absence that haunted Nathaniel. It was the possibility that Isla had finally discovered her voice didn't need his world to be heard. And for Isla, the realization that she could rise from public shame and find power in her own creation was not just healing, it was revolution. The kind that started not with applause, but with a single step towards self-respect and the quiet closing of a ballroom door behind her. Forever. Los Angeles had a way of changing shape depending on where you stood. From a penthouse window, it gleamed with promise and ambition. From a sun-scorched bus stop in East LA, it breathed in rhythm with survival. Isla Moreno had learned to navigate both versions of the city, but it was the latter that taught her to breathe on her own. The weeks after the gala were quiet in sound, but loud in transformation. She'd stepped out of the shadow of a woman who had tried to define her worth through mockery, and into the hard clarity of her own resolve. Isla had buried the dress in the back of her closet, not out of shame, but to preserve it as evidence, a reminder of how deliberate cruelty can sometimes look like elegance. She hadn't responded to Nathaniel's messages, not because she hated him, but because she needed the space to unlearn what she once mistook for balance. Each morning she woke with the taste of resolve on her tongue. She took long walks through old neighborhoods, sketched murals in alleyways, and poured her thoughts into a project she had quietly nurtured for over a year, a revitalization plan for a derelict community center just south of the 6th Street Bridge. Her professors had seen it only as a concept. But for Isla, it was memory made concrete. Her father once took her to that very building when she was a child, before he vanished from her life without explanation. It was during a weekend visit with her grandmother, Eleanor Moreno, that the truth emerged. The two sat on the back porch, the hum of cicadas mixing with the warm breeze of a late afternoon. Eleanor brewed chamomile tea the way she always did, steeping it long, no sugar, with a wedge of lime on the side. Isla had been describing her design proposal, detailing how she wanted to preserve the center's bones, but open its spaces to light, movement, and gathering. Eleanor listened with her usual quiet pride. Then, without looking up, she said, "You know, your father once wanted to rebuild that place too." Isla paused. "You never talk about him." Eleanor sighed, the kind that seemed to pull the weight of years from her lungs. Because remembering him has always been tangled with injustice. She folded her hands. Your father, Miguel Moreno, wasn't just an architect. He was a visionary, idealistic, maybe too much. He joined the Carmichael group when you were still a baby. Evelyn Carmichael's husband, Jonathan, was still alive then, and they saw in Miguel a future they didn't quite understand, but needed. Isla listened in stunned silence. He proposed projects in neglected neighborhoods, parks, shelters, community hubs, things that didn't earn big money but changed lives. Evelyn hated it, said it diluted the brand. Miguel pushed harder, too hard. Eventually, he was accused of mishandling funds. It was all orchestrated, of course. Evelyn made sure of it. They erased his name from projects he started, bought silence from contractors, and when he refused to play along, they ended his career. Isla felt the air thin around her, and then he disappeared. Eleanor nodded, out of shame, out of fear, maybe both. But why didn't you tell me this before? Because you needed to build your own foundation, her grandmother replied. Now you're ready to know. Later that night, Isla sat alone in her apartment, scrolling through archived project files online. She found one, an early Carmichael proposal for an East Side green corridor, and buried inside the PDF was a signature. Miguel Moreno, it was real, all of it. And buried deeper in the metadata of the file was something else. Funding. A scholarship listed under a silent grant from the Carmichael Foundation, issued the same year Isla had entered architecture school. They had paid for part of her education, not out of generosity, but guilt. She felt nausea rise and closed the laptop. Her connection to the Carmichaels was deeper than she ever imagined, and more complicated than she wanted it to be. Meanwhile, Nathaniel was descending into a private purgatory. He hadn't heard Isla's voice since that night. Her silence was a language he hadn't yet learned to respect. He wrote apology after apology, each more heartfelt than the last, none receiving a reply. He began skipping events. His assistant handled calls. When his mother summoned him to discuss a joint venture proposal with a Dubai investor, he declined for the first time in his life. He didn't want deals. He wanted answers. Late one evening, he drove back to the cafe where they had first met. It was closed, lights off, but he sat on the bench across the street anyway, staring at the mural Isla once told him reminded her of healing. Something about cracked tiles turned into constellations. He stayed there for hours until the sun came up. The next day, he went to her old college campus. He wandered the halls until he stumbled on a wall of student showcases, and there, among the top designs, was Isla's latest project, the reclamation of space as memory. It wasn't just architecture, it was storytelling through concrete and glass. And in the corner of the poster board was a small printed note. Advised by Mr. Avery Nathaniel froze. He knew that name. Mr. Avery was an elusive investor and design visionary whose influence stretched quietly across many of Carmichael Group's philanthropic ventures. And he also knew that his mother hated the man for being too sentimental about structures and people. Curious and desperate, Nathaniel reached out to him. To his surprise, Mr. Avery agreed to meet. They sat across from each other at a small library tucked behind City Hall. Avery was in his 70s, with eyes like cracked marble, soft but observant. He listened without interrupting as Nathaniel explained what had happened, what he had learned, and what he wanted to understand. "Why did you mentor her?" Nathaniel finally asked. Avery looked over his glasses. "Because she reminds me of everything this city forgets. And because your mother once told me she would rather demolish history than admit it had value. Isla builds differently. She builds from memory." "Did you know about my father and Isla's father?" Nathaniel asked. "I did," Avery said. "And that's why it's time someone told the truth." He pulled out a folder and handed it to Nathaniel. Inside were documents, architectural drafts, funding records, testimony affidavits, all pointing to what Evelyn had done to Miguel Moreno, and to how she had kept Isla close enough to watch, but never to empower. "She thought she was burying a name," Avery said. Instead, she raised a legacy. That night, Nathaniel drove to Isla's apartment but didn't ring the bell. Instead, he left the folder with a note. Just 2 words. I know. The next morning, Isla found it on her doorstep. She read it slowly, the weight of the pages sinking into her lap like bricks. When she got to the end, she didn't cry. She simply sat in the quiet, the city humming in the distance, and whispered, "It was never about the dress. It was about erasure." In that moment, Isla understood that her pain had not been a misstep. It had been a path, a test not of worth, but of clarity. She wasn't small, she wasn't lesser. She was the daughter of an architect who dared to remember where he came from. And soon, the city would remember him too, because she wasn't going to disappear. She was going to build. Napa Valley smelled of lavender and legacy. The hills, lined with sun-kissed vineyards, glowed like something out of a painting. For most, it was a place for leisure, weddings, and million-dollar wine tastings. But on this particular weekend, it was the backdrop for something far more intricate, a moment that would unravel decades of strategy, power, and control. Isla hadn't known the full scope of the event when she accepted the invitation to present her community revitalization work at the Harmony Through Design fundraiser. She was simply told it was a collaborative event, bringing together architects, philanthropists, and urban innovators to spotlight future-facing projects across California. That alone had thrilled her. She hadn't even asked who was hosting. The invitation was extended by the Urban Planning Council and signed by Mr. Avery himself. That had been enough. She wore a pale slate-gray jumpsuit, strong lines, modest neckline, simple jewelry. Professional, confident. A few strands of hair slipped from her bun as she stepped out of the guest shuttle and onto the grass of the estate, which was nestled beside a vineyard that rolled like a velvet ribbon toward the horizon. She took a deep breath and felt the nerves rise. But she didn't flinch. She had nothing to hide anymore. It wasn't until she reached the registration table that she saw it, the embossed crest of the Carmichael Foundation on the welcome banner. And not far from it, engraved in brass on a nearby pillar, Carmichael Estate. Her stomach tightened. She turned slowly, eyes scanning the lawn, and then she saw him. Nathaniel stood in conversation with a group of older men near a stage draped in ivory linen. He looked leaner than she remembered, sharper around the eyes, but the same. When he caught sight of her, something passed over his face, a moment of breathless recognition. He excused himself gently and started toward her. She didn't move. When he stopped just in front of her, they stood silently for a moment, as if the air itself were holding its breath. "I didn't know you'd be here," he said finally, his voice low. "I didn't either," she replied, "until about 5 minutes ago." "I tried to stay away," he said, "but this was something I had to see." She looked around. "Whose event is this, really?" Nathaniel sighed. "It was supposed to be my mother's. One final bid to reaffirm the Carmichael brand. But Mr. Avery and a few others, they've been working behind the scenes." "For what?" Isla asked. "To bring the company back to its roots," he said. "Back to something that matters." Isla felt something shift inside her, a crack in the wall she had so carefully built since the night of the gala. "You look well," he added, softer now. "I am," she said, and it was true. Before either could say more, a voice called over the microphone, welcoming guests to take their seats for the afternoon presentation. Isla nodded politely and made her way to her assigned section, her heart still echoing with questions. The stage was framed by tall oak trees and golden sunlight. The event director, a woman named Simone, took to the mic and introduced the theme of the day, Designing for Dignity. She spoke of the importance of community-first spaces, of equity and inclusion. And then, the twist. "We are proud," Simone said, "to introduce our new initiative, Urban Revive, a project that will focus on transforming underserved neighborhoods through thoughtful design, accessible resources, and the voices of those most impacted." Applause broke out. "And we are even prouder to announce that the director of this division will be someone whose work has already redefined how we think about space and story. Please welcome Isla Moreno silence, and then stunned clapping, followed by rising cheers. Isla froze. She looked at Nathaniel. He smiled, not with pride, but with something deeper. Relief. Recognition. She stepped slowly onto the stage, the applause swelling around her. She adjusted the mic, scanned the crowd, and then said, "I wasn't expecting this." Laughter rippled gently through the audience. But maybe that's the lesson, that some of the best things happen when we stop expecting to be validated and start showing up with our truth. My work isn't about buildings. It's about memory, about reclaiming space in a city that often forgets who it's supposed to serve. Her voice didn't tremble, not once. She closed with a quote her father used to say, words she hadn't spoken aloud in years. "We build not to impress, but to include." As she stepped off the stage, the standing ovation still echoing behind her, she saw Evelyn Carmichael for the first time that day. The older woman stood in the back, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Her eyes met Isla's and narrowed only slightly. But Isla no longer needed to shrink. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, the guests mingled beneath strings of lights. Nathaniel found Isla again near the wine station. "That was incredible," he said. She didn't smile right away. "Did your mother know I was being named director?" "She found out when you walked on stage." Isla studied his face. How did she take it? "She told one of the donors she needed air and walked into the vineyard. I don't know if she's come back yet." "I thought she'd try to stop it." "She did," Nathaniel said, "but Mr. Avery made sure she couldn't. The board backed him. The foundation backed you." "I don't want to destroy her," Isla said quietly. "I know," he replied. "That's what makes you different." They fell into a long pause. "Do you hate me?" he asked finally. She didn't look away. Number. But I needed to hate what happened. I needed space to become someone who wouldn't let that happen again. He nodded, the pain visible in his eyes. "I've missed you. Every day." "I know," she said, "and I missed the version of you who listened like he didn't know the ending. That's the only version I want to be now." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "There's a project proposal I've been working on. A collaboration, if you'll have me." She took it, opened it, and scanned the top line. Joint Initiative, Carmichael and Moreno, Downtown Renewal. He looked at her, suddenly uncertain. "Too soon?" She folded it back up slowly. "Maybe not soon enough." They stood beneath the lights, surrounded by the soft murmur of new beginnings. But far beyond them, Evelyn Carmichael sat alone on a bench in the vineyard, the last of the light catching her cheekbones. She held a glass of wine she hadn't touched, her phone silent in her hand. For the first time in years, no one waited for her decision. She had once believed her power came from control, but tonight proved something else. It could be taken, it could evolve, and perhaps if she chose, it could be forgiven. Back at the estate, Isla turned toward the estate house where a dinner celebration was beginning. Nathaniel offered his arm. "Shall we?" She took it, not because she needed him, but because now she knew she never did. The afternoon light spilled gently over the quiet neighborhood street, softening the edges of buildings and bathing the sidewalks in a warm glow. Isla Moreno stood in the doorway of her home, watching her daughter sway gently in her stroller as she stirred. Esmeralda's eyelashes fluttered against her cheeks, the same golden brown as Nathaniel's. A breeze ruffled the hem of Isla's sundress, carrying with it the scent of lavender and fresh bread from the bakery down the street. Everything about this moment felt earned, not by favor or legacy, but by struggle and conviction. The journey from scandal to peace had not been linear. After the gala, after Napa, after the exposure and the reordering of everything the Carmichael name once controlled, came the quieter season, where wounds scabbed over, where people chose whether to remember with bitterness or grace. Zella chose grace, but not forgetfulness. She didn't want to forget what it had felt like to be small in a room built to remind her of her place. She didn't want to forget the humiliation or the resolve that followed. She didn't want to forget who she became when she walked away from Nathaniel, not out of hate, but out of the need to find her own footing. It was only after she stood firmly on that ground that she allowed him back in. Their relationship didn't pick up where it left off. It had to be rebuilt, gently and truthfully, brick by brick. Nathaniel didn't try to fix things. He just stayed present. He learned to listen differently, to listen without preparing a defense, without trying to translate her pain into something that made sense to him. In doing so, he finally understood the depth of his own conditioning. They were married not in a grand cathedral or a destination island, but beneath the sycamore trees, in the courtyard of the community center Isla had rebuilt in her father's name. It wasn't opulent, but it was sacred. There were handmade paper cranes strung through the branches, a circle of friends and family gathered close, and a small string quartet playing Vivaldi between sips of lemonade. Her grandmother Eleanor walked her down the aisle. Mr. Avery gave a blessing with a quiver in his voice. Evelyn Carmichael, dressed in a muted navy gown, sat quietly in the second row, a soft tension around her eyes. Forgiveness had come in increments. Evelyn never apologized with flowers or theatrics, but she showed up, first at Isla's community project openings, then at volunteer events. She began helping at an orphanage on the edge of the city, far from her usual philanthropic playgrounds. There was no press, no photos, just Evelyn, stripped of adornment, learning to listen to people whose names carried no power. It was there she met two young girls, sisters, who reminded her of something long buried, perhaps of herself as a child, or maybe of the person she once wanted to be before the expectations of legacy devoured her softness. She began to visit them weekly, bringing art supplies and sometimes just a pair of listening ears. When Isla found out, it moved her deeply. Not because she needed Evelyn to redeem herself in order to feel whole, but because she knew what redemption cost. It was a cold morning the day Isla gave birth. Nathaniel had paced the hospital hallway for nearly 7 hours before Esmeralda finally arrived, fierce and alert and wailing with a determination that made the nurses laugh. Isla cried the moment she held her, not because of the pain, but because of the clarity. In that second, she understood everything her father must have dreamed for her. She felt the weight and beauty of legacy, not the kind built with wealth, but the kind forged through love, risk, and truth. They named her Esmeralda Evelyn Carmichael. It was Nathaniel's idea. Isla hesitated at first, but when she saw the way Evelyn's hands shook the day she held her namesake for the first time, she knew it was right. The woman who once orchestrated humiliation with a smile now cradled a new generation with humility. The years that followed moved quickly. Nathaniel took a senior role in the Urban Revive initiative alongside Isla, focusing on green housing design and sustainability. Their projects began to win awards not because of branding, but because of impact. They built homes that grew gardens, schools that doubled as shelters, libraries that felt like sanctuaries. They poured themselves into the city like rain, softening cracks, nourishing roots. And yet, despite all their work, some days were still hard. Isla still flinched at whispers in a room. Nathaniel still battled the voice in his head that measured worth by approval. They didn't live in a fairy tale. But they had something better. They had truth, and they had each other. One Sunday morning, Isla took Esmeralda on a walk to the park near their home. As she rounded the corner, she saw someone familiar standing near the bench under the jacaranda tree. Evelyn. But she wasn't alone. The two girls from the orphanage clung to her sides, laughing as they tried to balance on the low stone ledge that bordered the flower beds. Isla approached slowly. Evelyn turned, surprise flickering across her face, before it softened into something else. Gratitude, maybe. Or peace. Isla, she said. Good morning? The girls looked up and waved. Isla smiled at them and then met Evelyn's gaze. Volunteering again? Evelyn nodded. They're spending the day with me. Their foster placement fell through. We're getting ice cream. They're lucky to have you, Isla said. I'm the lucky one, Evelyn replied quietly. There was a pause. Then Isla added, You should come for dinner sometime. Just you. Evelyn's breath caught. She hadn't expected an invitation, not ever. Are you sure? She asked. Isla nodded. I think we're long past pretending we're enemies. Esmeralda asks about you. She remembers the garden you planted with her. Evelyn blinked away sudden wetness from her eyes. I'd like that very much. That Thursday, Evelyn arrived at their home just after sunset. The table was set simply but beautifully. Wildflowers in a jar, soft jazz playing from a corner speaker, Esmeralda running through the hallway in mismatched socks. Nathaniel greeted his mother with a long, silent hug. No words were needed. Over dinner, they talked about everything and nothing. Evelyn shared stories from her childhood that Isla had never heard. She confessed things she once buried in pearls and posture. Nathaniel told stories of his early insecurities, and Isla laughed with the ease of someone who finally saw her past, not as a wound, but as a spine. At the end of the night, after the dishes were done and Esmeralda had fallen asleep with one hand still clutching a crayon, Evelyn stood in the doorway, unsure how to say goodbye. Charles looked at her, voice soft. You can come back, not just for Esmeralda. For us. Evelyn swallowed. I never thought I'd be given another chance. Isla stepped forward, her voice strong. Then don't waste it. As she stepped into the night, the stars blinking above her like old friends, Evelyn felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Hope. Back inside, Nathaniel wrapped his arms around Isla as they watched their daughter sleep. You think it'll last? He asked. Isla didn't answer right away. She brushed a curl from Esmeralda's forehead, her fingers gentle and sure. I don't know, she whispered, but for the first time in my life, I believe we're building something real, and that's enough. Outside, the night wrapped around the city like a promise. Not a perfect one, but a beautiful one, messy, unfinished, and deeply human. And in a small home where legacy had once meant burden, it now meant love. Unconditional, unshakable, undeniable. In a city sculpted by image and ambition, where legacy often eclipses humanity, the story of Isla Moreno and Nathaniel Carmichael unfolded not as a simple love story, but as a profound journey of identity, dignity, and the redemption of truth. It began in the quiet corners of East Los Angeles, where Isla lived her life grounded in dreams that felt miles apart from the towers of wealth that defined the Carmichael name. Yet destiny, or perhaps something more deeply human, intervened the day Nathaniel walked into a modest cafe, seeking solace in anonymity. He found Isla, and in her, he glimpsed something unfamiliar, authenticity. But love between two people from opposite worlds is never just about love. It's about what each of them carries. Nathaniel carried the weight of a legacy built on control, perfection, and perception. Isla carried her father's erased reputation, her grandmother's unspoken truths, and a city that often forgot people like her existed. Their connection grew not in grand gestures, but in late-night conversations, quiet drawings, and the subtle freedom of being seen. Still, the shadow of Evelyn Carmichael loomed. Evelyn, Nathaniel's mother, embodied the very system that sought to define worth by wealth and presentation. Her calculated humiliation of Isla at the gala, disguised as an invitation, was not merely a social maneuver. It was an attempt to restore an imagined order, to remind the world that lineage triumphed over merit. But her plan backfired. Isla walked away not broken, but ignited. The shame turned into blueprints, the rejection birthed vision. Isla channeled every insult, every whisper, into a project that not only rebuilt a forgotten community center, but also resurrected her father's name, Miguel Moreno, long buried beneath the polished plaques of the Carmichael Foundation. As the truth came to light with the help of the elusive Mr. Avery and a collection of quietly righteous voices, the narrative shifted. Isla became not just the girl who was once humiliated at a party, but a symbol of what happens when the marginalized reclaim the narrative. Nathaniel, for his part, shed the version of himself that had once been too passive, too loyal to silence. He confronted his mother. He lost the trust of her allies. But in return, he found his own voice, a voice that didn't echo the Carmichael brand but amplified Isla's purpose. They didn't reunite immediately. Isla had to choose herself first. Only when she stood tall on her own terms did she allow Nathaniel back into her world, not as a savior, but as a partner. Their love was reborn, not in extravagance, but in truth. Their wedding under the sycamores was a quiet resistance against everything Evelyn once worshipped. And Evelyn, to her credit, began to change. Not through words, but through action. She volunteered, she listened. She held her granddaughter, Esmeralda Evelyn Carmichael, in her arms with trembling hands, not because she had earned forgiveness, but because she was finally learning how to be soft. The story of Isla and Nathaniel is not about winning or revenge. It's about transformation, about what happens when a person chooses to rise, not by climbing someone else's ladder, but by building a new foundation altogether. It's about love, yes, but more so, it's about the courage to say, I am enough, even when the world tells me I am not. It's about the power of truth to reclaim what history tries to erase. And this story, though set against the backdrop of wealth and family power, speaks to something deeply universal. It reminds us that our value is not determined by the rooms we are allowed into, but by what we bring with us. That standing up, even when your voice shakes, is still standing. That grace, when wielded with strength, can undo generations of silence. So what's the takeaway? The lesson here is that legacy is not something we inherit. It's something we choose to define. Isla didn't inherit power, but she created impact. Nathaniel didn't inherit empathy, but he chose love over approval. Evelyn didn't inherit humility, but she chose to find it in the quiet twilight of her influence. And we, as everyday people, face the same choice. In our workplaces, in our families, in our relationships, we must decide, will we conform to what is easy or expected, or will we fight gently, persistently, truthfully for what is right? You may not be a Carmichael. You may not have to attend galas or manage foundations, but maybe you've been underestimated. Maybe you've been misnamed, misjudged, or misunderstood. If so, Isla's story is yours too. It says, you matter. Your voice matters. And no matter how they try to dress you up or down, you have the right to walk boldly in any room with your head high. Now, let's see if you've been paying attention to what really made this story special. When Isla received the invitation to the Carmichael Foundation Gala, what truly empowered her to walk away in the end? A. Her discovery of Nathaniel's betrayal and Evelyn's plot. B. Her realization of her own worth and her father's legacy. Which do you think was the deeper turning point? Comment your answer below, A or B, and tell us why. We'd love to hear your insight and feature your responses in our next story episode. And as we bring this incredible journey to a close, we want to know, what would you have done in Isla's place? Would you have walked away? Fought back? Reconciled? Your perspective matters. Drop it in the comments and let's inspire each other. If this story moved you, challenged you, or reminded you of your own truth, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Every like, comment, and follow fuels us to create more heartfelt stories like this. Stories that honor the complexity of life and the quiet strength of those who choose love over fear. Until next time, keep your heart open and your voice strong. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply be yourself.